All right, everybody, welcome to one more session on Azure Cloud. In this particular session, we'll majorly discuss about Azure Global Infrastructure. We'll understand what is the meaning of global infrastructure. So there are basically some terminology that we need to understand if we have to understand this. That includes Azure Data Center, Azure Region, Azure Geography, and Azure Availability Zones. So if we understand these four terms, then it will be easy for us to understand what is Azure Global Infrastructure. Okay. Now let me open my whiteboard to explain these four terms. Now let us start discussing the first term, which is called as data center. Now let us understand what is a data center. I mean, to tell it, right? A data center, you can say it is a physical facility. Now, what will be there in this physical facility? Now, let's say if this is our data center, okay? In a data center, let's say there is databases, there is web servers, there is some virtual machines, there is racks which hold the servers. There will be multiple racks. All these racks are obviously connected with each other. Okay, so you can what will be there in this rack? Maybe servers. Now, all these elements, databases, your servers, network, virtual machines, everything together, we call it as a data center. Okay, everything together, we call it as a data center. Now, Azure has so many data centers across the world. Okay, this is what a data center is. Now let us understand something called as a Azure region. Okay, now let us say, let's say this is one data center, this is one data center, this is one data center. Now group of these data centers is called as a region. Okay, group of these data centers is called as a, now all these data centers in these regions are connected together. Now it's not mandatory that every region should have three data centers. Let's say there are some regions which is just having one data center. Okay, let's say there are regions which has two data centers. Okay, so what is a region? A region is one or more data centers which are physically connected is called as a region. Now Azure has lot of regions across the world. Let's say for example, there's a region in West US, there is another region in East US, North Europe, Southeast Asia, Japanese, it's there in London. So there are different regions which are across the world. Okay, Azure, I think it's having around uh, 200 plus data centers across the world, and every data center is part of a region. Okay, now to define a region again, you can simply call Azure region is some geographical area on a planet. Okay, and Azure region is one or more data centers connected together, and the latency between these two data centers is less than 2 milliseconds. Okay, the connection between this, I mean the latency between this is less than 2 seconds. That means they are extremely fast in communication. And now let's say there are some services on Azure, like, let me give a list of services. Let's say there is virtual machines, there is DNS, there is databases, there is load balancer, VMSS, okay, Azure Data Factory, Synapse Analytics. There are a lot of services, right? Now, every service is not available in every region. Let's say these four services are available in region one. These three are, I'm just giving for example. So there are some region specific services as well. Okay, some regions has all the services, some regions does not have couple of services. So Azure has approximately around 50 plus regions across the world, and each region has multiple data centers. And again, these are regions. Every now and then Azure will keep on increasing the regions and they will publish it. Now Azure also have a separate region for US government, and they have some partnered regions with China, only to serve customers from China, China East and China North. Okay, these are also different regions, and there's also different regions for US government, um, to serve US government. All right. So this is what a region is. A region has multiple data centers. Now, what is that? A data center having physical elements like databases, servers, etc. And a region having multiple data centers. Now, we understood out of four terminology that we need to understand: Azure data center, Azure region, Azure geography, Azure geography, and availability zones. We understood what is a data center and what is a region. Now, the next one we need to understand is called as Azure geography. Now, what is Azure geography? Now, let's say we have data centers. Let's say these three are data centers connected together. We call this as one region, right? Now, let's say we have another region. What will be there in this region? In this region also we'll have data centers. Okay, this is also one more region. Now, this combining of these two regions or more regions, it's not mandatory only two or more regions is called as Azure geography. Okay, but there are some rules it has to follow. Now, let's say if we have one of the region in US, the second region, if it has to be part of Azure Geo, it also has to be there in the US region, maybe typically separated about 300 miles, to make sure if there is a natural disaster to this region, still this region is up. Okay. Now, why it has to be there in the same country? Because there are some compliance issues like data residency. That means couple of countries have a rule that if you collect my citizens' data, make sure the data remains in our country data centers only. Okay, so to comply with those rules, okay, we have multiple regions separated around 300 miles or within the same country. Okay, so that two or three regions together is called as Azure geography. So now, even one region fails, let's say I have my application deployed on this region and this region as well. So even this region fails, my application will be still up and running. that is called as Azure geography. So till now we understood what is a data center, we understood what is a region, we understood what is a Azure Geo. So if you look at this data center combining of servers and all other physical resources, region multiple data centers together is called as a region, and multiple regions together is called as Azure geography. Okay. Now the next term that we need to understand as part of Azure global infrastructure is called as Azure availability zones. This is typically asked in interviews. What is Azure availability zone? Now, this availability zones, let's understand this. Now, let's say we have data center 1, data center 2, data center 3. We have three data centers. Now, we know in each data center what will be there. There will be racks with servers, okay, and there will be separate power. Okay, let's say this is power. So this data center will also have power. This will also have power. Okay. Now there'll also be cooling and networking. So these are the high available components. I mean, if networking goes down, we'll not be able to access this data center. Okay. And all these three data centers, we know that they are connected with a high internet connectivity. So the latency is less than 2 seconds. We know that latency less than 2 seconds between these data sets. Now let us say I want to create two virtual machines. Now if my both virtual machines are created in this data center, if this data center, let's say my both virtual machines are created here. Now let's say if this data center goes down, or else let's say this power is failed. My both data centers, my both virtual machines are down now, right? Instead of that, Azure gives me a zonal service. Let's say first virtual machine I'm creating, it should come here. And the second virtual machine I'm creating, it should come on this zone. Now, even the power on this goes down, the power is up here, right? So my virtual machine here, it will be up and running. So in case, let's say I'm creating two virtual machines in place of one. Why? Because if one virtual machine goes down, second one will be up. But let's say both the virtual machines are there in the same data center. It does not make any sense if the power or cooling or network goes in that data center, no? So Azure has created something called as Azure availability zones. So even in case of one data center goes down, you will have your infrastructure components working on a secondary data center. So that is called as Azure availability zones. So now when we are creating virtual machines, I will show you that option in a bit. You have an option to choose whether this virtual machine should be there in one availability zone, two availability zone, or third availability zone. Okay, that is what is a availability zone. So we understood what is a data center. Group of data centers is called as a region. Group of regions is called as a Azure Geo, and availability zones. What is an availability zone? A physically separated or you can say a unique physical locations within Azure region that offers high availability to protect your applications from data center failures. That is called as Azure availability zone. Let me shift to my Azure console and show it to you guys. Now let me go to Azure portal. I'm there on Azure portal now. Let me go to virtual missions. Select this option called as virtual missions. Select create. Go to Azure virtual mission. Okay, now if you see here, availability options. Okay, if I select availability zone, now it is saying that three zones are there: zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. So where this particular virtual machine has to be created in this particular region, east to west. What is the availability option? Now let's say this has three regions, right? Now let's say let's take some other west to west. Okay, let's see how many regions are there here. This is also having three availability zones. Okay, let's say Japan. Okay, this is also having three zones. So there will be some regions which will have less number of zones. You see, here South India, this does not have a multiple availability zones option here. Okay, so when you are creating high available applications, you should also choose a region where there are high availability zones. Okay, now let's see, if I go to Azure. Okay, now if I'm there in, let's say, region India, now what region I should select? Now there is something called as Azure Speed Test Azure websites. Now the nearest region for me is South India, which I'm getting 65 milliseconds. Next is Central India, next is East India. So based on that, you can decide what will be the latency if you of the application if I choose to host it on Brazil or South America or India. Okay, these are the different regions that are there. Okay, so that is how you choose a region where to host your application. All right, thank you for joining the session, guys. I hope we're able to understand Azure Data Center, Azure region, Azure Geo, and Azure availability zones. See you guys in the next session. Take care.